This is Dave Steinberg. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. And we're here with my old buddy, Scott Gleason. Scott is a CRS realtor. If you see a realtor with the designation CRS, it means they're the elite in the real estate industry. And Scott, you've been a CRS for as long as I know you, 20 years probably.
Probably, yes. I thought it was the most valuable designation to get, the certified residential specialist. It took the most education. It had the best referral possibilities, and especially it's given me access to validated experts in other markets. So I had a client who wanted to buy something in Orlando. I found a certified residential specialist to help him, and he was delighted. I went to sell my dad's house in North Carolina. Once again, certified residential specialist, super service. And they've called me too. And I always honor referrals with my 110% effort.
And for as long as I've known you, you've always put 110% in. You know, one of the things about realtors that many people don't understand is that there are not all realtors are the same. They all start with the same designation, but they're all licensed as realtors. But what many people don't understand is that you pay the realtor who's been a realtor for 3 hours the exact same thing as someone like yourself who's a CRS, who's a real pro, and so you might as well go with the best in the business. And Scott, you're the best in the business when it comes to the Central Jersey market.
Well, thank you. It's something, I think, a great deal of our affinity for each other, and why we've kept in touch and done business together so many times is that we both think about what we're doing and think about the ramifications for our clients, and think about the best interests of our clients. And it's always been both something I've lived by and something that's observable in the way you do business. And
well, thank you.
And I think that's our number one common ground.
So talking about clients' best interests, what do you think is going on in the market today? Is this a good market to buy a home?
It's a market where you can buy a home. It's a market where I would say the white water of buying that people were experiencing a year ago has calmed a little. The fever's broken, the frenzy is out of it to an extent. It's still a supply-driven market, and by that I mean you still have to find a house to buy. There is not an over selection. The shelves are hardly replenished with homes to buy, and the most attractive houses still find themselves the object of competition among buyers.
And
it's
I'm sorry. When I go to the news and I'm reading an article in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or USA Today or wherever I get my news, I may see something about the real estate market being down. And you and I know that all real estate is local. All real estate is local. And therefore, the important thing is to understand your market as opposed to what's happening in Topeka, Kansas, or God knows where. And
absolutely,
that's where having a great realtor comes in, because I don't care how much data you have. Data requires that someone who's smart processes it into information. And so you could have access to the listings, but that doesn't much tell you something. And a lot of the data that people bandy about is not even all that accurate.
Data can be totally misleading. if you want to use it that way. And one of the most misleading, we talk about headlines. The headlines are national, and real estate is never national. Real estate is it's hyper local. Sometimes you can live on this side of X Avenue or that side of X Avenue, and it can make a 10% difference in the value of a home, or a 10% difference in the competitiveness to buy a home. Grade school to grade school within a town can make a value difference, but also employment trends and livability trends and taxation trends, all of those things, throughout the nation, affect values, and so do spikes. So when you see articles that say, the 10 cities that have taken the biggest discounts in the in 2022, first of all, the discounts are like 3 and 4 and 5%. Off of 77% spikes. so it's headline making. It's headline making without reality. In our local world, the New York City metro employment market, the jobs are still there, the wealth creation is still there, and people are still competing for the nicest houses.
And now you're in Westfield, and in my recollection, and help me with this, you guys have a great school system.
I raised 2 children here. They both went. One went 1 through 12, and one went 4 through 12. They both graduated from here and went to McGill as a terrific economic courtesy to me. And got themselves a great education at a great price. McGill pricing is terrific, but they were so well positioned. I was such a satisfied consumer of the Westfield school system, and 99% of Westfield parents are, and they're very avid participants in the quality of their schools and their teachers' lives. They're very supportive of their school system. They show up. The parents show up, the kids show up, and the faculties show up in a big way.
Right.
I was frequently moved by the extra efforts that the Westfield faculty made. When we first moved here, my little one was going into first grade, and her future first grade teacher was in North Carolina with her daughter, who was having a first child. And a week later, we got a letter from Mrs. Joyce, the first grade teacher, saying, "Dear Geneva, welcome to Westfield, welcome to Washington School. I look forward to teaching you in the fall." So this woman stopped while her daughter was, flush with her first child, to write a note to my kid. And we had experiences like that every other year, where they just went the extra mile for our children.
That's amazing. So if I were looking to buy a home right now in Westfield, would you say that it's a good time?
It's always a good time. If what you need to do is buy a home, this is a good time. It's a better time than it was a year ago, because you can, instead of competing against many dozens of other buyers, you're competing against a little handful of other buyers, and good buyers agents know techniques to make your offer as valuable as it. There are many value points about an offer besides the price. Actually, one of the value points is who's the agent with the offer. Agents get to know each other. They get to know which agents bring their client all the way to the altar. And so there's a value in that. And there are values, there are other aspects that can be added to an offer on the very last page of the contract that can make offers more attractive. And we
some examples.
examples are agreeing in advance to limit inspection items to authentic inspection items. I usually say mechanical, environmental, safety, and structural. So the buyer agrees to limit inspection items to those, meaning they're not going to bring up a chip in the, on the kitchen counter. They're not going to bring up a broken Venetian blind or a crack in a window pane. And because those things can really be a nuisance, and especially there's a great deal of generational selling in Westfield. And older people, they remember buying houses and then putting some effort into the house. There are a great many people in the buying generation who really like to think that they will just walk in and unpack and enjoy it like they did their condo or their rental in Jersey City, where it's just completely ready to go. They think they're too busy. They think they're a two-career family. They just think that making a living and buying a home is hard enough without having to touch up anything. So
Right.
that
And
can
therefore,
be
you need to have the right buyer for the right home.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you need to assure people that that's not going to be a friction point.
Mm.
People don't like to have their sale price diminished between the contract and the closing. By that, another thing that's buyers are beginning to retract from a little bit, but it's helpful if you have a great confidence in that the property that you're buying is going to appraise, is offering some nominal appraisal cushion, where you're saying, if it underappraises by X, I'll make it our problem, not yours.
Right.
We'll
Hey, Scott.
we'll round up
Yeah.
to keep our ratio,
And
or they'll accept a different ratio.
one of the things that we're seeing is that the quite often, 30-40% of the time, maybe even more, we're getting new appraisal conditions. So, for example, on about 30% of our transactions where the buyer is putting down 25% or more, there is no appraisal, at least on purchase prices up to $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no appraisal. It's not required. Another thing that we're doing a loan right now, and instead of an appraisal, they did a condition report. And often we can tell your buyer and therefore your seller that we can do that an appraisal won't be required on their home.
And
Think about how powerful that is.
you know that before the loan is submitted.
We often know that before the loan is submitted.
Uh-huh. Is that a lender by lender policy, or is that a loan type policy, or is it a ratio policy?
So it's available on what we call conforming loans. Conforming
Yeah.
loans are loans with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And so let's say if you have somebody who's doing an FHA, it would not be available. Somebody's doing a jumbo, it would not be available.
Right.
It's available on properties in value up to $1 million. That's going to change in the next year or two, but right now it's for property values up to $1 million. And it's available, generally speaking, 25% down or more.
I
and
see.
The lender determines, or the system determines, that given what's going on in this market, we don't need an appraisal because we're covered. And then you just take one thing right off the table. You take the risk.
That's very valuable, especially because appraisers can be opinionated, and some appraisers read the current zeitgeist, and some appraisers insist on looking back, and sometimes they look back and they don't account also for price trends. So they're depressing the value of their appraisal based on, because they're looking at 3-6 months ago when things might have been valued 3 or 5% less than they are today. So That's a having the appraisal, especially, if five people offer a price for something, to me, appraisers feel that that's not an indication of market value, but in the stock market, that would have been the market value.
Right,
Five
right.
people raise their hand. That's the new market value.
Hmm. So what about if you're working with, like you said, that a lot of what's going on in your market is generational transfer, meaning that maybe older home owners are taking the opportunity to downsize and sell. What's the advice you give a home seller in today? What do they need?
For that generation, who they probably hold the key to uh, to the real estate volume and the selection of homes to buy around here to open up. And they also happen to live at many of the nicest addresses in
Mm,
town. So, and those have an exception where sometimes the addresses are phenomenally valuable, even if the homes have not had any improvements since, 1947 or 1958. They still have their address value alone can make them incredibly valuable.
mm. And they're
Um,
often sitting on very large um, gains, right? Because if somebody bought in Westfield 30 years ago, that might have been what, a 150, $200,000 purchase.
Exactly. And so it's possible that they're selling at an exponential resale value,
Hmm.
even without improving the house in between.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
yeah, um we've seen houses sell for over $1 million that were bought in the 60s for less than $100,000.
Mm.
So that, yes, that can happen. And they go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm sorry. So what do you tell that um, homeowner who's starting to think about selling their home? Is this a good market for someone to sell their home?
Yes. It's a brilliant market. If so, you asked me earlier, is it a good market to buy a home? And it's better. If is it a good market to sell a home? It remains a brilliant time to sell a home. It remains the best time ever to sell a home. In the stretch of real estate history, in the stretch of the 28 years I've been doing this, this is still the most attractive market for the seller uh, that there has been. And the sellers that are there's another thing going on in this area, which is there's a great deal of um, rentable and condo building right now that is senior friendly. So there are a lot of people that they want to get out of these big houses, but they don't want to move too far from their country club or uh, from their doctors or from their grandchildren, because there's also it's such a lot of people grow up here and then they go do a stint in London or Hong Kong or Paris or Buenos Aires or wherever their career takes them, and then when their reproductive years come, they come racing back to Westfield because they want their kids to have something like the childhood and something like the
Hmm.
education that they had. So there are a lot of second and third generation um, people who are the new homeowners and new home buyers, but they've actually been here before.
Mm.
They graduated from high school here and they're back. Um, so people don't want to move away from grandchildren, doctors, country club, uh, you know, gin and bridge club, etc. So they're looking for places, one level living in this area, and that one level living is being built in some good volume, and it's picking up steam.
Mm.
So those people will have more places to go. When it's time to sell, I kind of apply a rule. When people ask me, what should I do to prepare my house for sale? If there are two ways to make those decisions. One is sometimes um, you can do a certain amount of lipstick that will make a house photograph well, and then people will come, especially if you have one of those bigger, older houses in one of those nicer, older neighborhoods. That is where you get the buyers who are willing to buy for $1 million and invest 300 to modernize the house to suit their taste. And some of them relish doing it. As much as others are allergic to it, there are people who do relish doing that. And they're not afraid of either price tag. Um, they'll go for the address and they'll go for the larger backyard. Uh, you just paint it and tidy it enough so that it's photographable and let the buyer take over from there. Some people don't have energy for that. They just want people to come over and buy their house. And there are buyers, you can market or not market, and there are also houses that are just plain in disrepair that need more than possibly an amateur buyer can handle. There is a market, and when I say there's a market, you can I know 125 people that'll buy a house in disrepair and buy a house with no mortgage financing contingency and no inspection contingency, except an oil tank sweep. But you can also go on the multiple listing service and expose yourself to thousands of people who will do that. There are literally thousands of entrepreneurs who would like to get their hands on an improvable property in Westfield. So we'll call that the wholesale alternative. The advantage to the wholesale alternative is that whatever you're offered will not be diminished by inspections, and it won't be diminished by appraisal. And often you can also negotiate for flexibility about when you go and flexibility about what you leave behind.
Mm.
If there's, well, some people have more stuff in their house than they can take to their next house. And if it's going to be an entrepreneur, they're going to have dumpsters there anyway. And they're going to have, muscle labor there anyway. So they will accept a house with stuff in it, which an amateur buyer will not.
So what you're saying is that for a homeowner, they probably have two choices, and it depends on the nature of it depends on their character, and it depends on their home. And so
Yes.
they can go into the MLS, into the multiple listing service, and but that usually requires patience. It requires the house be present well, and that it's really maybe cleaned up a bit. And so they can go the traditional route, or someone like yourself has access to buyers who may just buy it as is and put the work in to bring it current. And that's a second option. And so the client has that option of going one way or the other.
They do. And they have the option of preparing the house for a wholesale buyer, which means no preparation, or preparing it, inching toward, making it digestible by an amateur buyer, an end user. It's not, that doesn't dictate whether you go in the MLS or not. And I'll give you an example. I recently listed a property. The inheritor was in Colorado. The house was in very significant disrepair, on an attractive lot, and we wanted to give her the benefit of widespread attention, the maximum number of eyeballs. So we did MLS list it, but I MLS listed it with exterior pictures only and a floor plan, so that somebody who was going to fix it, they could see where the rooms were. and they could see what the square footage was. And you could see from the outside that the house was going to need, and it said all over it. It said, significant repairs required. Doesn't necessarily have working utilities. Bring a flashlight, et cetera, et cetera. So that there was no mistaking what I did in that case. What we didn't want was, a weekend warrior imagining that they were going to bring this house up to speed, because it wasn't for them. So
Mm,
there was no reason to tease them
mm,
and have them ask, well, we'd really like to make an offer, but we'd also like to have an inspection. We really couldn't. And it sold for 109% of list price, um, and for cash, and the buyer accepted everything in the house that she came once from Colorado, picked out, some sentimental items, and the buyer accepted it with everything non-sentimental,
mm.
including
We,
the next time I drove by it, there were a couple of speakers, the stereo speakers, each one was the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. I mean,
ah,
they and they were out on the sidewalk. I don't know what their destination was, but it had some big, big items in it.
we've actually had success with that as well, because, um, I don't know what the price point is on that house, but we've had, let's say, certain instances where the house actually had holes in the roof, right?
Mhm.
The, as you said, utilities may or may not have been working. And so with the right seller and the right buyer, you can actually take a civilian buyer, not a professional, and do a renovation loan, but do it on purchase. So you buy the house, and let's say the house is at 750 and needs $200,000 worth of work, and they're putting down 20%. You can buy that home and get approved for a mortgage with the renovation already built into the approval. So normally on a purchase, right, where the lender will come in and they'll do an appraisal and they'll say, well, there's no kitchen here, we can't do this mortgage. Or there's a hole in the roof, the house is not
Right.
biddable. On a reno loan, on a renovation loan, they'll take that. And you just have to have a plan for renovating the home. And then they'll lend you the down payment plus they'll lend you the purchase plus the renovation plus your down
Right.
payment
Based on the finished value.
based on the full finished value. And
Right.
and sometimes that'll work. It's hard if it's $500,000 of renovation required, but if it's $100,000 or $200,000, it can be done, and sometimes that's a great solution for a buyer. Um, you and I have spoken a bit about strategies for home sellers, right? Because as you know, a home buyer has to be able to afford the house. And if, let's say, if you walk into a house and the taxes are high relative to the market, you have some interesting ideas here. Tell me a little bit about it.
So we can start with the famous PITI, which is, what realtors educate buyers to that acronym, and it's part of qualifying to borrow to buy a house, and it stands for principal, interest, taxes, insurance. So for somebody to qualify to buy a house, this is your expertise, but their income has to be in a ratio to the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance cost of owning that home. So the principal and interest are variable according to the price range that they shop in. The taxes can vary for very similar houses through many, many vagaries of the tax assessment system. Houses that may seem identical to you and me may have different tax assessments, which dictate different tax bills. To give you an example of an old I would say, anachronistic system. The tax assessors used to assess frontage. So a house that was a corner property, I don't see any advantage in owning a home on a corner property. You have two front yards. Your house has to be sort of crowded into the interior, rear corner of the house. It usually costs you some backyard because you have to have a 35-foot setback on each of the streets. But the assessors were taxing more because they had more frontage. That's not a market value assessment, though. That was made of an old formula. Now, by law, assessment has to reflect market value. If your house is overtaxed for whatever assessment reason, maybe they think your house, where you haven't done the kitchens and baths since 1948, is as valuable as a house across the street, which did have the kitchens and baths done in 2019 and sold when there was a revaluation, and they've just raised your taxes out of reason for what its actual market value is. When you go to sell your house, people who are going to buy it are going to look at it. They're going to look at the price, but they're also going to look at the monthly cost. If you can improve the T in the PITI by getting your taxes lowered, you're going to have a bigger audience to buy your house, or you're going to be able to charge more principal and interest, more price, because the formula is going to come out the same because you've neutralized the tax factor. So with that in mind, every couple of years, I sponsor for the local citizenry a tax appeal seminar. And I have a guest speaker, Jennifer Jacobus. She's an attorney who she started her career defending the town of Livingston, New Jersey against tax appeals, and then converted her practice to helping people file tax appeals. And she works statewide. She does nothing but tax appeals. Her website is taxappeallaw.com, I'm pretty sure. But it's all she does day in and day out. Her expertise is really, really profound. And she's a great speaker. And so the seminar gives people a sense of how to qualify, whether they may qualify, and walks them through the steps. And they may choose to try it on their own, or they may choose to enlist Jennifer Jacobus or any of dozens of attorneys to help them do it. With Jennifer, and most attorneys who do this, their charge is based on if they get you a tax reduction, they charge you some fraction of your first year's benefit. And then after that, if you're staying in your house for years, you have lower taxes for the rest of your ownership. Or if you're not staying and you did it for the purpose of making your house more attractive to sell, you're going to have a huge multiplier in terms of the benefit to yourself besides the fact that you only paid a fraction of what you saved the first year anyway. So it's a very valuable seminar to attend. It's going to be Thursday, February 16th, here at Coldwell Banker in Westfield, and we'll put the information on the screen later.
Right.
And you may want to know about it. And she's helped, by the way, she's helped me reduce taxes on several of my properties. She's helped my friends and clients. And people have, sent me love letters saying, thank you for inviting her to speak at this thing or that thing, because, we called her later and now, we're spending an extra $2,000 a year on dinners out instead of municipal taxes.
So we've been privileged to be sitting here with Scott Gleason, a great realtor and great friend. And Scott, thank you so much. I started this by saying that you pay the same for a newbie realtor as you do for an expert like yourself. And it's just so fascinating to watch the way you create value for buyers and sellers because of your understanding of the market and your understanding of the real estate industry. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David. It's as always, it's a wonderful pleasure to speak with you.